Fans of classic platformers from the mid-90s have yet another revival on their hands with the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series that might not command an audience as large as Crash, Sonic, or Mario, but does elicit just as much passion from its fans. Here we see the original two games, Klonoa The Reverie from the PS1 and Klonoa 2 Lunity's Veil from the PS2, both of which are great games remembered fondly by those that played them, but nowadays you might find the steep prices that these games go for a bit of a barrier to entry. Not to worry though, as Namco has a spruced up remaster of both games together in this collection. For those that missed out on these delightfully cozy two games, Klonoa started out as a charming 2.5D game that, despite feeling almost exclusively aimed at Japanese audiences, has always held on to a solid following in the West, and never came close to the bigger mascots of the 90s that everyone knows, but it wasn't totally obscure either. A sequel to the 1997 original would launch on the PS2 a few years later with bigger levels, fully 3D designs, and more gameplay variety, but it still stuck with the 2D gameplay style. In both games, you guide Klonoa through three-dimensional levels on a two-dimensional plane with a, at the time, unique ability to grab enemies and throw them at each other, objects of importance, or use them to double jump and reach higher areas or close large gaps. All the while interacting with criminally adorable characters and letting the perky music continuously whisk you forward. Levels often have alternate paths and hidden items, so some exploration and replayability is encouraged. Enemies rarely ever pursue you, but rather just go about their little routes, so it's more about finding the spots where you fit in to grab them, or just avoiding them than actually fighting with them. Because of this, the difficulty is mostly a breeze in both games, but they do have some challenging moments as the different arrangements of enemies, platforms, locked doors, and objects that need enemies thrown at them provide a good amount of variety for the relatively small handful of elements that make them up. Like any good platformer, fun bosses and creative level design that occasionally has you doing things like gliding through the air or careening down a water slide keep things moving well. And that's probably the two games' strongest quality. They are really good at letting the characters, levels, and music work their magic. It's also important to note that despite clearly being inspired by more formidable platformers like Sonic and Yoshi that preceded it, you don't really come to Klonoa to have your skills tested, as much as you do to relax and enjoy the heartening levels and endearing characters. Between the personality of the two games, the variety and pacing of the stages, and the outstanding presentation of visuals and audio, it's hard to not be enamored with these games, especially if you're a longtime fan of the genre. As remasters, the two games are from two very different eras, and thus have entirely different levels of effort put into them to bring them on par with each other. Klonoa 2 on the PS2 still looks great by any measure, so here you see a more conservative touch-up that seems mostly focused on performance and making everything sharper and brighter. The Reverie also does this, but in addition to all of the pre-rendered 2D sprites being replaced with 3D models like Klonoa 2 has. It's basically the Wii version, but with an even newer coat of paint that I think is an improvement to that one. The levels have been mostly remapped with modern textures that are sure to look great for the foreseeable future, with plenty of movement and personality in the backgrounds giving a nice rich look to each stage. Newer players will almost certainly appreciate this take, but I suspect some fans of the originals might prefer the slightly darker colors of those original games' levels, as they do seem to help the foreground characters pop a bit more in those versions. I also feel like there is a little something lost in translation for the remaster of the original game, with them dropping the sprites and redoing the pre-rendered cutscenes. Because of this, I would have liked to have seen the original version of at least Reverie Series playable here for preservation or even just curiosity's sake if nothing else. The remasters do look great by all accounts, but they do have a different vibe in some ways. That said, it's hard to argue with the performance boost that brings both games up to 60 frames and even in 4K on current-gen hardware. Load times are also quite fast, as they should be. There are some reports saying that the Switch version has some trouble hanging on to its target frame rate, but at least on the PS5, without a doubt, both games have never felt better to play. That much is for sure. Additions to the games are few but include new difficulty options to make the games even easier and a 2-player support mode, which pretty much just boils down to a second player being able to provide you with a massive jump on command. This can easily lead to camaraderie or conflict, but either way it's an amusing little touch. You also have some DLC goodies like cosmetics and a music player that you can grab separately if you want. The audio seems really well handled here in both games, all things considered, sounding slightly cleaned up in some tracks to completely reworked in others. All of it sounds good. Dialogue for Door to Phantomile sounds strikingly aged, but outside of re-recording everything, there wasn't really much for developer Monkeycraft to work with here, but you can definitely hear it. As a fan of older 32-bit games, and somebody that still regularly plays them, old crushed audio from the PS1 era doesn't bother me, but juxtaposed with the modern visuals here, you will notice it. Klonoa 2 doesn't really have that problem, as the original version had the luxury of the space the PS2's DVD-ROM discs provided, so the audio has aged much better. Most importantly though, the music for both games sounds great across the board. All in all, I think Monkeycraft clearly spent most of their time focusing on the areas that mattered most. Klonoa The Reverie Series is an excellent remaster of 2 already excellent games. It might not be a de facto replacement of the originals for Klonoa purists though. The liberal overhaul of the visuals, especially in the first game, do create a slightly different tone that might not be every OG fan's cup of tea, but I imagine if you're in that camp yourself, then you probably already have a way to play those games anyway. For everyone else, even longtime fans like myself who feel the new look is a net positive, the performance boost and reworked music is more than enough of a reason to jump in. Additional content is minimal, and I can't stress enough how having those original versions on here would really have sealed the deal, but for how well the games are handled, it's hard to not enjoy yourself with the Reverie series. And thankfully, with the collection now available for the PS4, 5, Xbox One, Series, Nintendo Switch, and Steam, Namco has made it easier to do so than ever before. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time, right here on GamingBolt.